My brother accused me of selling our mother's car right before his wedding. But $25,000 disappeared. And the workshop cameras revealed who really sold it. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin. In a pretty close-knit family. Or at least that's what I thought. My brother Liam, 35M, had always been my mother's favorite. Don't get me wrong. My mother is a wonderful woman. But Liam had that charming way about him that made him the center of attention. Claire, 28F, was always quieter. Focused on my studies and then on my job as a graphic designer in Chicago. The dynamic between my brother and me was never completely conflictive. But there was always some tension. Liam was the typical charismatic guy who always found a way to get away with things. While I felt relegated to the role of the responsible daughter. When I was little, it didn't bother me so much. But as I grew up, the differences became more evident. And over time, that dynamic began to turn into accumulated resentment. It all started a few months ago when my mother decided it was time to sell her old 1976 Chevy Impala. That car had been in our family for generations. Although it was in questionable condition, it had enormous sentimental value. My mother, Evelyn, had come to the conclusion that she no longer needed it and that the money she got could be used for some renovations in her house. However, she was a little indecisive. And Liam, as always, stepped in to help. The Chevy was a relic of my grandfather, and on more than one occasion, I had heard my mother say that she would never sell it. However, over the years, it had deteriorated quite a bit, and the repair would have cost more than it was worth sentimentally to her. I understood the decision, although I felt some sadness that something so full of memories was leaving. On the other hand, I didn't think too much about it because, honestly, I had my life in Chicago and didn't see my family much. One day, while visiting my mother to help her reorganize her garage, I noticed that the Chevy was no longer there. It seemed strange to me because Evelyn hadn't mentioned anything about having sold it. At first, I thought maybe they had taken it to be repaired or moved it for some reason. However, when I asked, my mother replied that Liam had already handled the whole matter. According to her, he had told her that he had found a buyer willing to pay $5,000 in cash for the car. When I heard that, something didn't add up. To begin with, that Chevy, although classic, wasn't worth that much in the condition it was in. Besides, who pays in cash for something like that? It was too good to be true. And where's the money? I asked casually. My mother replied naturally that Liam had saved it because he wanted to make sure it was used wisely for the renovations. Hearing that, my stomach twisted. It's not that I didn't trust Liam well. To be honest, maybe I didn't trust him completely. My brother had had problems with money in the past, had lost jobs, had made questionable investments, and, of course, always found a way to convince my mother to help him financially. This was not new. But $25,000 was not just anything. I tried to let it go, but something kept bothering me. So, with some subtlety, I started asking questions. Who was the buyer? Why wasn't the money being used immediately? Was there a concrete plan for the renovations? Every time I asked something, Liam's answer was vague. Don't worry, Claire. Everything is under control, he would say with that smile he always used to get out of trouble. But this time he didn't convince me. Meanwhile, the weeks passed, and Liam's wedding to his fiancée, Emma, 33F, was approaching. It was evident that Liam was focused on making his wedding the grandest event the town had ever seen in years. Emma seemed just as excited. Although she had always been a little distant with me, she wasn't a bad person, we were just very different. And our relationship was never particularly close. When I finally decided to confront Liam about the money, he looked at me as if I were crazy. Why are you so busy about this? Claire, the money is safe, he said with a sharp tone. But his words did not reassure me at all. I knew something was wrong. On the other hand, I didn't want to generate a conflict right before his wedding. So I tried to let it go until things got completely out of control. One day, while helping my mother prepare the house for some guests who would be arriving for the wedding, I mentioned the Chevy money again. This time, Evelyn was a little uncomfortable. Liam says everything is in order, she said quickly, as if she didn't want to delve into the topic. But something in her expression gave me the impression that she had doubts too. I decided to investigate on my own. I contacted the workshop where the Chevy had been stored before the sale. But what I discovered was even stranger. The owner of the workshop, an old family friend, told me that Liam had picked up the car weeks ago but that no one had seen it since then. There was no documentation of the sale. And the alleged buyer was a mystery. It was then when the real storm began. Just when I was trying to figure out what had really happened with the $25,000. Liam decided to accuse me publicly of stealing the money. Yes. You read that right. My own brother. After Liam decided to accuse me, everything took a turn that I never imagined. To give you a little context, this happened during a pre-wedding family gathering, something like a small informal dinner at my mother's house. There were a few uncles, cousins, and, of course, Emma's family. Everything seemed to be going normally until, out of nowhere, Liam dropped the bomb. "I think we should talk about something important before we continue celebrating," he said with an unusual seriousness in him. Everyone turned to look at him, curious and a little confused. I also looked at him, having no idea what was coming. It was then when he said it. "Claire, I think you owe us an explanation about the Chevy's money." I'm not going to lie. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. What was he saying? What explanation could I give if I hadn't even been involved in the sale? I tried to keep calm and asked him what he was talking about. It was then when, in an accusatory tone, he began to say that he had discovered inconsistencies in the dates and that something didn't add up. According to him, I had been hanging around the workshop and surely had intervened to keep the money. "Are you saying that I stole $25,000? I asked directly since there was no other way to interpret his words. Liam made a theatrical gesture as if he was deeply hurt. "I don't want to accuse you of anything, Claire, but the circumstances are suspicious. Don't you think? You were asking a lot about the money. Why so much interest?" he replied with that arrogant tone that always made my blood boil. The worst part was that some relatives began to look at me curiously, as if there was a possibility that what he was saying was true. Emma, for her part, seemed uncomfortable but said nothing. My mother, Evelyn, tried to intervene. "Liam, this isn't fair." Claire wasn't even involved in the sale but Liam interrupted her, saying that someone had to take responsibility for the lost money and that I was the only one who had shown too much interest in the matter. I tried to defend myself by explaining that I was only worried because something didn't add up. But Liam kept insisting. His tone became more aggressive, saying that if I had nothing to hide, I should prove it. It was a humiliating moment. At that point, I realized that I wasn't going to win this argument in public. So I decided to maintain my composure and look for evidence on my own. After dinner, I went straight to the workshop where the Chevy had been stored before the alleged sale. I wanted to see exactly what had happened and if there was anything that could prove my innocence. The owner of the workshop, Mr. Harvey, received me with the same warmth as always. When I explained what was happening, he was surprised and assured me that he also didn't know what had happened to the money. He told me that Liam had stopped by the workshop weeks before, saying that he already had a buyer and that he would take care of everything. Harvey showed me the security cameras from the day Liam picked up the car, although the Chevy had been loaded onto a crane as part of an agreement. Something caught my attention. In the images, Liam could clearly be seen talking to a man I didn't recognize, and then counting a wad of bills. Although the amount wasn't clearly visible, it was evident that there was a cash transaction. Harvey assured me that that was the last time he saw the car. Then everything began to fall into place. Liam had sold the car, taken the money, and now he was trying to blame me to cover his tracks. But why? Why go so far right before his wedding? I knew that Liam had financial problems, but this was too much. I needed more evidence. So I asked Harvey for a copy of the video. Although he initially hesitated, he finally agreed, understanding that all this was affecting my family. When I got home, I decided not to confront Liam immediately. I wanted to be completely prepared before accusing him of something so serious. So, with the video in hand, I called my mother and told her what I had discovered. Evelyn was devastated. She felt betrayed by Liam, but she also asked me to prevent the family from being further broken with the wedding so close. "And what do you suggest I do, Mom?" I asked, frustrated. She asked me to wait until she could talk to Liam in private. Although I didn't agree, I agreed out of respect for her. However, Things didn't remain calm for long. A couple of days later, during the wedding rehearsal, Liam decided to go a step further. In front of Emma and her family, he again insinuated that I was behind the lost money. It was then when I realized that waiting was no longer an option. I took out my phone and played the video in front of everyone. The silence that followed was almost deafening. "Do you want to explain this, Liam?" I asked with a calmness that even I didn't know I had. Emma looked horrified. My uncles and cousins were stunned. Liam tried to deny it at first, saying that the video was taken out of context. But it was too late. The evidence was clear. He had sold the car and kept the money. When I played the video in front of everyone at the wedding rehearsal, the atmosphere immediately became tense. For a moment, no one spoke. You could feel how the air became heavy while everyone processed what they had just seen. Liam, who had always had the gift of manipulating situations in his favor, for the first time seemed disconcerted. His eyes went from the screen of my phone to the faces of those present, desperately looking for a way to control the damage. Emma, his fiancée, was the first to break the silence. "Liam," she said, her voice trembling. "What is this? You sold the car and kept the money?" Her words resonated in the room like an echo. No one knew what to say. My mother, Evelyn, seemed on the verge of tears, while some of my uncles and cousins exchanged incredulous glances. Liam tried to regain his composure. "This isn't what it seems," he exclaimed, raising his hands as if he were on trial. "Claire is taking everything out of context. That sale was legitimate, and all the money is safe. I don't understand why she's doing this right before my wedding." "Sure. Because $25,000 isn't exactly in sight," I replied, trying to remain calm, although inside I was furious. "Liam, you yourself said that the money was being saved for Mom's renovations. But so far no one has seen it. Where is it?" At that moment, Liam began to stutter. It was evident that he didn't expect me to present evidence, much less in front of everyone. It was then when my mother intervened. "Liam," she said in a tone that mixed sadness and disappointment, "is it true what Claire says? Did you sell the Chevy and not tell us? Where is the money?" Liam paused, trying to find the right words. Finally, with a defensive tone, he replied, "Of course I have it. I saved it because I wanted to surprise you with the renovations, Mom. But now Claire is ruining everything. She always tries to make me look bad. That was too much for me." "Make you look bad?" I replied, unable to contain myself. "Liam, you're projecting. It's you who publicly accused me of stealing the money. And now that we've discovered you want to blame me for ruining something? You're an adult. Take responsibility for once in your life." Emma, who until that moment had been observing in silence, got up from her chair. "What else are you hiding, Liam?" she asked, her voice laden with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "First you told me that everything for the wedding was covered. And now I find out that you took money from your mother too. Did you use that money for the wedding?" Liam's face turned red. He was trapped. "No, of course not," he replied quickly, although the doubt had already been sown. Emma didn't seem convinced, nor did the rest of those present. My mother began to cry softly. It was heartbreaking to see her so hurt. It broke my heart. My mother had always blindly trusted Liam, and now that trust had been shattered in front of everyone. While I tried to comfort her, Liam continued trying to justify his actions, but no one seemed willing to listen to his excuses. Things reached a critical point when Emma announced that she needed time to think. "I don't know if I can marry you," she said, her voice trembling. "Not only because of the money, but because this shows that I can't trust you. What else are you hiding? What else haven't you told me?" Liam tried to approach her, but Emma stepped back, clearly devastated. It was then when some of my uncles began to intervene, asking Liam to apologize and to clarify once and for all where the money was. "Okay," he finally shouted. "I spent it. Okay. I had some debts that I needed to pay. It wasn't my intention for this to come out like this, but I had no other choice. I thought I could return it before anyone noticed." The impact of his confession was like a bomb in the room. Everyone began to talk at the same time, trying to process what they had just heard. My mother got up from her chair, trembling with rage and sadness. "Liam, how could you?" she said between sobs. That car was your grandfather's. You sold something so valuable and didn't even have the decency to tell us the truth. That night, the family was completely divided. Some tried to justify Liam's actions, saying that he was probably stressed by the wedding and the debts. But most were on my side, outraged by how he had handled everything. And worse, by how he had falsely accused me to cover up his own actions. Emma, for her part, decided to go home to her parents that same night, leaving it in doubt whether the wedding would continue. Meanwhile, my mother insisted that Liam return the money, although it wasn't clear how he would do it, considering that he had apparently spent it all. For my part, although I felt vindicated, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of sadness and rage. This was my brother. We had grown up together, shared memories and laughter, and now we were here, in the middle of a chaos that he himself had created. The morning after the disaster at the rehearsal, things were far from calm. My mother hadn't slept, and neither had I. I had spent the night going over and over everything that had happened, wondering how we had reached that point. Liam had confessed in front of everyone that he had spent the $25,000 to pay his debts. And now the whole weight of his actions fell on him. Or at least that's what I thought. Emma, for her part, had cancelled all family gatherings and was not answering Liam's calls. According to what I heard, she had taken refuge at her parents' house, probably reconsidering the whole marriage. My mother, Evelyn, was trapped between sadness and anger. Although she had always protected Liam, this time she couldn't ignore what he had done. Not only had he lied and stolen, but he had brought shame to the family right before such an important event. That morning, I decided to talk to my mother. She was sitting in the living room with a cup of coffee that she had barely touched. "Mom," I began carefully, "what do you want to do about the money? Because Liam clearly doesn't have it, and I don't think he's going to recover it soon." She sighed, looking at the floor. "I don't know, Claire," she replied with a subdued voice. "He's my son. But what he did, I never imagined that he would come to this. How did he get into so much debt? Why didn't he tell me? And worst of all, how could he blame you to protect himself? I will never understand it." I put a hand on her shoulder. "Mom, you have to talk to him. This can't stay like this. If we let him get away with it again, he'll never learn." She nodded slowly, but it was clear that she didn't have the strength to confront him yet. Meanwhile, the news of the confrontation during the rehearsal had spread throughout the family. Some cousins and uncles called me to express their support, while others, incredibly, tried to justify Liam's actions. "We all make mistakes," said one of my older cousins, trying to minimize the situation. "Maybe he was desperate." "Desperate?" I replied furiously. "Desperate isn't an excuse to steal $25,000, lie to the whole family, and then try to blame his own sister." The conversation didn't last long after that. It was clear that there were people who would always defend Liam, no matter what he did. Later that day, I received a message from Emma. I was surprised because until then we hadn't spoken directly since the incident. Her message was brief but forceful. "Claire, thank you for showing the video. If you hadn't, I probably would never have known this side of Liam. I would like to talk to you if you have time." I accepted, and we met at a cafe in town. Emma seemed exhausted, as if she had cried all night. Without beating around the bush, she told me, "Did you know anything about Liam's debts before all this?" I shook my head. I knew he wasn't the best with money, but I had no idea he was that bad. If I had known, I would have tried to warn you earlier. "I'm sorry, Emma." Emma sighed. "It's not your fault. This is a disaster. I've been going over everything in my head, and I think I need to cancel the wedding. I can't marry someone who can lie so blatantly and manipulate his family to cover up his problems. If he did this to you, what could he do to me later?" Although her decision didn't surprise me, I felt a pang of sadness for her. You plan your wedding. You dream of your future. And then everything falls apart because the person you trusted turns out to be someone completely different. That afternoon, Emma made her official decision. She cancelled the wedding. It wasn't easy. Many things were already paid for, from the event venue to the catering. But she didn't care. "I'd rather lose money now than risk losing my peace of mind forever," she told me. The news quickly reached the whole family. And Liam, well, Liam was furious. That night, he appeared at my mother's, demanding to talk to her and me. When I saw him come in, I was already prepared for his defensive attitude. "This is your fault, Claire," he began, pointing his finger at me. "If you hadn't shown that video, Emma wouldn't have cancelled the wedding. Are you happy now? You ruined my life." I couldn't help but laugh, although there was nothing funny about the situation. "My fault," I replied, incredulous. "Liam, you sold the Chevy without telling Mom. You kept the money. And then you tried to blame me for everything. Do you really think that I'm responsible for what's happening to you?" My mother finally intervened, raising her voice. "Enough. Liam. Stop blaming Claire for your own mistakes. She didn't do anything wrong. You're the one who betrayed our trust. Not only did you steal from us, but you tried to humiliate your sister in front of the whole family. This is your fault, and no one else's." For a moment, I thought Liam was going to apologize, but instead he simply muttered something incomprehensible and left the house, slamming the door behind him. In the days that followed, the family became even more divided. Some supported Emma's decision and understood why she had cancelled the wedding. Others continued trying to minimize Liam's actions, saying that everyone deserves a second chance. My mother was devastated. Although she knew that Liam had done wrong, he was still her son, and it pained her to see him in this situation. But she also made it clear that she wasn't going to bail him out this time. "If he wants to regain our trust, he'll have to prove that he has changed," she told me. I, for my part, decided to stay out of it for a while. I had done what I had to do to defend myself, but I knew that my relationship with Liam would never be the same again. How do you trust someone who is capable of doing something like that? In the days following the cancellation of the wedding, chaos continued to reign in the family. My mother was trying to find a way to deal with the scandal, while Liam had become a ghost. No one knew exactly where he was or what he was doing. For my part, I tried to focus on my work and get away from all the drama. But it wasn't that easy. Messages from family members and some even from Emma's friends kept arriving. Everyone wanted to know more details about what had happened, as if this were some kind of show that entertained them. Emma and I kept in contact. She told me that she had spoken with the place where the wedding was going to be held and that she had been able to recover part of the deposit money, but not enough to cover all the losses. I felt bad for her. She didn't have to bear the consequences of the financial and emotional disaster that Liam had created. But Emma, with admirable strength, seemed determined to move on with her life. Meanwhile, my mother finally gathered her courage and spoke with Liam. He had been staying at a friend's house, according to what we learned later. But when Evelyn confronted him, his attitude was more defiant than repentant. "I don't understand why everyone is acting like I've killed someone," he told her. According to what my mother told me later, "Yes, I spent the money, but I did it to get out of a bad time. What did you expect me to do?" My mother made it clear that she wasn't going to bail him out this time. "If you want to redeem yourself, you'll have to return that money, Liam," she told him. "And you'll have to apologize to Claire. She doesn't deserve what you did to her. No one in this family deserves it." I didn't expect Liam to change overnight, but even that conversation seemed to have left him thinking. A few days later, I received a message from him. It was brief and not entirely satisfactory, but at least it was an attempt. "Claire, I'm sorry for accusing you. I was in a bad place and didn't know how to get out of it. I hope we can fix things someday." I didn't respond immediately. On the one hand, I appreciated the gesture, but on the other hand, I knew that words were not enough. There was a lot of damage to repair, and I wasn't sure if Liam was willing to make the necessary effort to rebuild our relationship. Meanwhile, Emma decided to cut ties with Liam definitively. She told me that she had collected her things from the apartment they shared and that she planned to move to another city to start over. "I can't stay here," she told me one afternoon while we were having coffee. "Too many memories. Besides, I know he'll try to convince me again, and I don't want to give him that opportunity." I admired her for her strength. It wasn't easy to make such a drastic decision, but I knew it was best for her. Before moving, Emma organized a small gathering with some close friends and family to say goodbye. It was an emotional event but also full of hope. We all wished her the best in her new life. On the other hand, Liam began to work overtime at his job to try to return some of the money he had taken. It wasn't much, But at least it was a start. My mother told me that he had started attending therapy, which, if true, was an important step. But I still maintained my reservations. I knew that real change would take time, and I wasn't ready to trust him completely. A few months later, things finally began to calm down. My mother managed to make the renovations in her house with some help from other relatives and some savings. Liam, although still distant, had begun to show signs of wanting to make amends. He sent me another message, this time longer, explaining how he had reached that point in his life and asking for an opportunity to talk face to face. I agreed to see him more for my mother's sake than for his. When we met, he seemed more humble than I remembered him. He apologized again, this time with more sincerity, and promised that he was working to change. Although I didn't completely forgive him at that moment, I felt that at least it was a step in the right direction. Emma, for her part, was thriving in her new city. We had maintained sporadic contact, and I was glad to hear that she was happy. She had gotten a good job and was beginning to rebuild her life. I will always be grateful to her for being brave enough to confront Liam and for having the clarity to make difficult decisions when she needed them most.